landmark verdict, the Supreme Court on Wednesday has directed that no demolition should be carried out without prior 15-day notice to the owner of the property without following the statutory guidelines. The Supreme Court has also said that the notice shall be served upon the owner by registered post and fixed on the outer portion of the structure. The notice shall also contain the nature of the unauthorized construction, details of the specific violation, grounds for demolition. This demolition, remember, has to be videographed, is what the court says. The violation of these guidelines will be treated as contempt. The bench, in its order, has also said that the executive cannot replace the judiciary in performing the latter's core functions. The apex court also said that the authorities must be able to show that the demolition is the only recourse available, even in cases where there are some encroachments. I'm told I have Harish and Adib both joining us live right now. I want to get in Harish first up before we go to Adib, who's joining us from Lucknow. You know, Harish, many would say that these are significant guidelines. For the very first time in the country today, there are guidelines on how such an action really has to be taken forward. But the court has nowhere said, Harish, what a lot of people are also discussing online and offline, is that whatever's happened so far was illegal.
Yes, that's right, Deepthi. In fact, all judgments, no judgment will have, in fact, a retrospective effect. So this judgment will be applicable from today. So, several Muslim organizations, Muslim individuals had come to the Supreme Court saying that only Muslims are being singled out for punishment, for penalty, and for punishment just because they are involved, they are accused in some riot cases. The authorities just go and demolish their property, and therefore the Supreme Court said, in fact, on day one itself, Deepthi, they had the Supreme Court had stayed any kind of what they call the illegal bulldozing action, which today the Supreme Court termed as unconstitutional, arbitrary and malafide, and which has no place in a country governed by the rule of law, and said that such unilateral action by authorities and high-handedness cannot happen in a country governed by the rule of law, and very clearly said that just because there is an FIR against a person, just because a person is a suspect, just because he is an accused or even convict, his property cannot be demolished except by following procedure established by law, and only if there is violation of municipal laws, panchayat laws, town planning laws, but not in this fashion. That is why the Supreme Court said that, okay, till now all this has happened, but henceforth in any such cases, these guidelines have to be followed. Very importantly being that once it's established that the demolition was illegal, there will be contempt of court action against the official, the errant official, and also what is very significant is that, Deepthi, for the first time Supreme Court has said that that particular official, he has the responsibility of restoring that property is on him, and he has to pay for that from his own pocket. And that is very, very important because that will be a major deterrent, because in case a top constitutional functionary or a collector asks a particular official to go ahead and demolish that property, he will think twice from now. That is what the court says. And courts also say that today we have decided whether the shelter above a person's head can be taken away just because he is involved in a criminal case. So Supreme Court has based this judgment on the fact that on the facet of the presumption of innocence in criminal jurisprudence, one is innocent until proved guilty. How can the authorities straight away go and punish a person by demolishing his home once an FIR is filed against him? So these are some of the questions raised by the Supreme Court, which has laid down very, very serious guidelines, especially, and also said that proper show cause notice, proper hearing, and also even in cases where the occupant admits that it is a illegal property, he cannot be directly thrown out, because the Supreme Court said it's a very sad, sorry state of affairs, sad sight when children, women and aged are thrown to the street just because they don't have, their house is illegal. That is a very sad state of affairs. Nobody can tolerate such a sight where women, children and the aged are dragged to the road just because their property has been demolished in short notice by the authorities.
Okay, you know, Harish, I think you've spent a good amount of time helping us understand why this is such an important and a landmark judgment. Before I get in, Adeep, to also, you know, talk about the politics of this, let's move a little away and talk about these guidelines in toto. Now, what really has the court said? What could be the important, you know, news points out of this entire issue that has come in the Supreme Court today? The first big guideline is already up on your screens. It says give time to challenge the demolition. Even if you've been given a notice, there should be enough time before the demolition takes place. The second big guideline, give time to arrange for an alternate arrangement so that you can move to another accommodation and you're literally not thrown on the roads. The third big guideline that the court has today kind of pushed forward is that no demolition without prominent notice that has to be put forward on the property, talking about the reasons for this demolition also. The fourth big guideline that the court has set forward is that must give 15 days to make an alternate arrangement, like I just said. All this is a part of the standard operating procedure now in place. The court continues to say that the notice shall have the nature of the violation, that what really warrants such kind of a demolition, that will also have to be mentioned in the notice. Let's bring forward the next big guideline as far as this big case is concerned. It says demolition report to be sent to the district collector. So clearly there is going to be accountability. Remember, the wheels of justice need to move, but then you need to speak to everyone, and authorities shall also hear the personal hearings. Essentially, the person who's guilty of these violations should also be heard. Also, directions is not for illegal structures. If you do something illegal, there is going to be action. So clearly that is also, you know, a distinction that the court makes. Violation of this order is also contempt, is the Supreme Court unequivocally saying today. It continues to say the demolition action must again be videographed so that everything is on record, and nothing that has happened will also obviously be politicized later. I want to see if we'll also get in our colleague Siddharth, who's joining us from our newsroom. He's been able to access a copy of this order. Siddharth, take it away and tell us, what does the order really say? We've discussed about 10 important guidelines. What more is it that makes sense? And then we'll also get an Adeep into the conversation. But Siddharth, first to you.
You've taken us through the comprehensive list of guidelines that the Supreme Court has in fact come out with before any demolition can actually proceed. The judgment, which is 95 pages long, basically begins on a very compassionate note. In fact, with a poem. Let me just read that out. It says, अपना घर हो, अपना आंगन हो, इस ख्वाब में हर कोई जीता है. इंसान के दिल की यही चाहत है कि एक घर का सपना कभी न छूटे. To have one's own home, one's own courtyard. This dream lives in every heart. It's a longing that never fades, to never lose the dream of a home. This is how the importance of shelter has been described by a famous Hindi poet, Pradeep. And then, of course, it goes down. Let me take you through a very important part of the judgment, which is para number 72, where the Supreme Court basically talks about the entire crux of what the petitions actually dealt with, which is the might of the state. I'm just going down to para number 72 right now, where it says the following. So para 65, and thereafter on 72, this is the most important bit. The chilling sight of a bulldozer demolishing a building when authorities have failed to follow the basic principles of natural justice and have acted without adhering to the principle of due process reminds one of a lawless state of affairs where might was right. In our constitution, which rests on the foundation of the rule of law, such high-handed and arbitrary actions have no place. Such excesses at the hands of the executive will have to be dealt with a heavy hand of law. Our constitutional ethos and values would not permit any such abuse of power, and such misadventures cannot be tolerated by the court of law. As we have already said, such an action can also not be done in respect of a person who is convicted of an offence. Even in the case of such a person, the property property or the properties cannot be demolished without following the due process as prescribed by law. Such an action by the executive would be wholly arbitrary and would amount to an abuse of the process of law. The executive in such a case would be guilty of taking the law in his hand and giving a go-by to the principle of the rule of law. So the rule of law, of course, is accorded primacy in the judgment that even in the case of a convicted individual, due process will have to be followed before a house or a property can be established as illegal, and only thereafter can a demolition can be initiated.
All right, Siddharth, for the moment, thank you so much for, taking us to those interesting excerpts of that judgment. I know Adeeb is waiting, but Adeeb, just allow me another moment, because let's take this story ahead. There's a lot of politics already happening on the story. Now, while the Congress has hailed this landmark verdict, the allied DMK says that this is too little, too late. They also say that the damage has already been done.
It's truly historic. I'm taking your words, because people have been waiting for this judgment for a very long time. There was an atmosphere of fear and scare spread by the powers that be, whether it be Uttar Pradesh or other states. The bureaucrats and the politicians thought they can substitute judiciary and take revenge on the basis of state action, which is completely arbitrary. In 24 hours, somebody's house would be declared illegal and demolished. Now, demolition Raj is come to an end. I'm happy Supreme Court has done it. I congratulate Supreme Court for that. Anybody who's done it in the past will also be punished, because Supreme Court says this act was illegal.
A welcome judgment for sure, but I think it's delayed, because it can't take 3 years or 4 years for this judgment to come. See, in states like Uttar Pradesh and Madhya Pradesh, ruled by BJP governments, the state government, rather the BJP government, has taken the law in their own hand and then goes on to demolish the house of the assumed person who's a convict. Like, he's not a convict, but they assume, and then they go and mete out the punishment. And that's also very selective. And majority of the bulldozer effect has been on minorities, right? So I think this is completely a travesty of democracy, and I think it's nowhere in a democratic country this can happen.